Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for Emergency Planning and Business Insurance for Artists, presented by Cameron Baxter Lewis of Surf Plus. I am Lisa Smalls, Director of Arts, Resilience, and Sustainability at South Arts, and I'm joined by my colleague Hillary Crawford. I am an African American woman with long blonde braids, and I'm wearing cream colored glasses with dark brown specks and a cream dress that has black stripes. Before we begin, I'd like to offer some helpful tips for today's session. To turn on captions, click the Show Captions button in the meeting controls. If needed, choose the language for the captions if it's different from the default. Please place all questions in the Q&A pod. We want to reserve the chat for interaction with the slides and for conversation and connection with the group. A recording of today's webinar will be housed on the South Arts website in our resources section, and registrants will also receive the link and today's presentation materials via email. Lastly, please use the link in the chat to complete a brief survey to help us better serve the field's needs and interests. I'd also like to acknowledge our partners at the NEA. South Arts empowers artists and arts administrators by expanding access to professional development opportunities. Our free Field Building webinar series offers timely, topic-driven sessions that respond to the evolving needs of the field, providing practical tools, insights, and industry best practices. South Arts receives support from the National Endowment for the Arts through a partnership agreement to produce webinars such as these and conduct additional programs for our constituents across the region. Please visit our website as well as the NEA's website for additional information and opportunities. With that, I turn it over to you, Cameron.
Great. Thank you so much, Lisa. Thanks to South Arts for having me here today, and thank you all for making time in your busy schedules to join me. I am going to share my screen. Should see a very happy, smiley frog. And now, presentation. Today, we're going to talk about emergency planning and business insurance for artists. My name's Cameron Baxter Lewis. I am white-skinned. I have on brown glasses. Today I'm wearing a checkered shirt that's red, blue, purple-ish, and I have brown hair. Joining you today from Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Today's presentation is going to be a little bit unique in that recently, Chapel Hill, North Carolina, where I live, experienced a pretty terrible flood from Tropical Storm Chantal. And unfortunately, my home was affected. The area received about 10 inches of rain within a few hours. So the first floor of my home got about 6 to 8 inches, which, as many know, is enough to destroy pretty much everything. So there is some noise in the background today. We're actually doing some landscape mitigation in the yard to try to prevent future flooding. So today's presentation will not only be theoretical per se, it'll also include some of the experience that I've had personally in the last few months. So with that, I have to say this topic is super important, especially as more and more climate-related disasters are happening around the US and the world. So I hope that we're able to cover some new material in a way that feels useful and applicable to your life or to your artistic practice. And without further ado, we're going to jump into the presentation. As Lisa was saying, if you have questions along the way, feel free to pop them into the Q&A. We're going to have time at the end. We should have plenty of time at the end to cover any questions you may have. But don't let those questions escape you. I know sometimes something pops in your mind. Feel free to send those at any time during today's presentation. First, I want to call out the artist that's highlighted here. This is Damon Melicon, Big Chief of the Young Seminoles. You will see his work in the next slide, but I always like to kind of call out the artist that we're highlighting as well, so you can check them out. Before we get into today's presentation, I'm going to talk about the organization that I'm here representing, the Craft Emergency Relief Fund, otherwise known as SURF Plus. From there, we're going to talk about personal preparedness because we think it's important that you put your oxygen mask on first before helping others. So if you're not personally prepared, it's going to be very hard for you to prepare your artistic practice. So we're going to focus on you as an individual first, and then we're going to look at how you can do some interesting things to safeguard your practice. At the end, we're going to talk about a lot of preparedness and recovery resources. Um, this part of the conversation is important and it is not exhaustive, meaning there are other resources out there. I'll also try to remember to share some of the resources that I've used in the last few months because it's kind of funny when you've been talking about resources for years and sharing them. As soon as a major event happens, you forget about all of the resources. So I've had to remember some of the resources I've shared out for myself recently. So I want to make a shout out there and let you all know about them as well. And then lastly, as I mentioned, you got plenty of time for questions. This webinar is scheduled for 90 minutes. I don't think you want to hear me speak for 90 minutes, so it will probably more likely run around 50 minutes or so, and then we'll have as much time as you all would like for questions. So this is Damon's work. You see, beautiful. Love it. Just want to call that out. Um, the Craft Emergency Relief Fund, otherwise known as SURF Plus, is celebrating our 40th anniversary. We're super excited about that. So we have been around since 1985. And it started as really kind of I don't want to say informal, but a very small group of motivated craft folks. They all attended shows together in the 80s, and you'd always hear about an artist who couldn't attend the show because they had an emergency. So what they would do is they would pass around a hat and collect donations for that artist and then send the money their way. And really the intention of that was twofold. One, it was to provide some monetary support for folks going through a hard time. But two, it was also to let that artist know they were part of a community that really understood the precarious nature of being a craft artist. And through a lot of the research and the findings we've done internally, as well as through partners, we know that many artists do not have a large savings to tap into in case of emergency. So in a moment, we'll talk about our emergency grants, which is really the origin of SURF Plus, but also what we're best known for. If you fast forward from 1985 to today, we still do those emergency grants, but we do a lot more. And one thing that I'll note that we don't really beat the drum loudly around, but we try to do is we try to advocate for craft artists at the federal, state, and local level. When there's legislation coming out that may affect large amounts of, for example, disaster relief grant recipients, we really try to be at the table and say, well, how would this work for artists who may have unique ways of generating income as well as unique situations. So a big win we had with FEMA about a year ago now was they started providing $500 grants for artists who had lost their tools as part of a disaster. I know $500 won't replace all of an artist's tools, but it was something we advocated for probably 10 years before it came to fruition. So I think it's advocacy is an important role that we play. But again, one that we might not necessarily lead with or might not be the first thing that we talk about. So just want to make that note. We do work with craft artists, and the first question is always like, well, how do you define craft? We're always very cautious with that and saying that we don't define craft for the field, but for the purposes of our programs and our eligibility guidelines. There's some disciplines that we see more often than not. Those include ceramics, wood, metals, fiber, and glass. But really, there's other 3D materials as well that folks are doing a lot of hand work with that can be eligible for our grants and programs as well. Um, to jump into those grants and programs, our emergency relief grant, again, is what we're best known for. These are $3,000 grants to U.S. craft artists who've had a practice-threatening emergency. Um, Emergencies can look like different things for different folks. Some of the categories we see a lot of are disasters. And I would say this year, probably more than any other, about 60% or so of our grants are going to go towards major disasters. But we also help with other unexpected life events. That could be a theft, that could be an illness, that could be an injury, it could be an accident. That could be a series of unfortunate events that have now cascaded into an emergency. It can look like a lot of different things because we recognize that folks' lives are complicated. When I began this program, this is my 7th year at Surf Plus. We awarded about a quarter of the grants that we do today. The program has grown at least fourfold since I've arrived, and typically about a quarter of our grantees, excluding this year, which I'll talk about in a moment, come from Puerto Rico. So that's our largest geographic reach. We did a lot of intentional work after Hurricane Maria and really have some strong champions within that area. We're very grateful that we have connected with the artisan and maker market within Puerto Rico. And those are folks who compose a significant portion of our emergency relief grants. I put this stat in the lower left-hand side, kind of in a funny way. In the past 5 years, we've awarded more than $3 million to 2,000 craft artists. Since October of this year, largely due to Hurricane Helene, we've already surpassed $3 million in grants that we've awarded. So we've done about 5 years worth of work since October. We just wrapped up another huge cycle of our Get Ready program, and these are $1,000 grants for craft artists to do any sort of activity that safeguards their practice. So some activities you might think about are you can do physical mitigation stuff to your studio. Maybe you install burglar alarms or smoke detectors or hurricane shutters, or air filtration systems are very popular. But you can also do other things. You can hire a financial planner to make sure that you're positioned and your practice is positioned to bounce back should you experience an emergency, or any sort of legacy and estate planning. So the projects can be pretty vast in this, but basically they just need to be something that we see as preventing a future emergency. That's the whole intention of this program. So just want to call that out if you ever decide to apply. Please keep in mind that the projects are intended to help prevent a future emergency in some way, shape, or form. The emergency relief grant's open year-round. You can apply at any time. Get Ready is done in cycles. So we just wrapped up a cycle on Tuesday. So we awarded more than 200 grants to artists who were affected by Hurricane Helene. And we're hoping to host another cycle of the Get Ready grants this fall. So it will likely open in early October, maybe that first week in October. So if you're interested in applying to that, please go to our website and you can sign up for an update. You just add in your email on our main page and you'll receive updates that we send out via our newsletter. So Get Ready program, similar to emergency relief, has grown astronomically since I began. At one time, we probably did 25 grants a year. And this year alone, we've done more than 400. So a very, very popular program. We see the demand for this grown as Surf Plus's brand has really increased. And it's a program that I love because emergency relief is pretty heavy. Folks are going through difficult times, and Get Ready, the projects are more about what they want their practice to look like in the future. So very, very positive facing. So those are our two grant programs. We also just briefly want to mention we receive donations from businesses that we award to artists who've received emergency relief grants. Example of that would be Scut Kilns. They donate 3 kilns a year to artists who've lost their kilns as a result of an emergency. So a really nice extra boost to folks who are going through a hard time. And obviously that preserves their emergency relief grant for other needs that have arisen because of an emergency, which, as we know, can be very, very costly. So those are a little bit of our grants and programs. Later in the presentation, we'll talk about some resources as well. But if you're interested in our grants and programs, I do encourage you to reach out to us, either by signing up for a newsletter or reaching out to programs@craftemergency.org. So now we're going to get into the presentation a little bit. This is a topic I've been talking about for like nearly 20 years. And it's something I find very, very critical, as well as something I think that we all need to intentionally take some time to consider, as well as to put some plans into place, and that is personal preparedness. Um, we're going to talk through some steps for you to approach personal preparedness. This is not meant to be prescriptive or the only way you can approach preparedness. You can do preparedness in a lot of different ways, and you don't have to do everything we discuss in the next little bit, but every little bit helps, right? Anytime you take some time to intentionally plan, that can really pay dividends when you really need that information or need those resources. So, without rambling any further, I do want to note everything I'm about to say is also available on ready.gov. Really awesome resource that provides a lot of information around preparedness as well as response and recovery. So definitely encourage you after this presentation to go check out ready.gov. But the first thing we always talk about when we talk about making a plan is, how are you even going to know something's happening? In other words, how are you going to receive any sort of emergency alerts and warnings? We're going to talk about something called wireless emergency alerts, otherwise known as WEAs. And these are short messages from authorized, typically government entities, but it could be federal, state, local, tribal, or territorial, that are broadcast from local cell phone towers. Everybody who has a smartphone can enable these alerts to be received. So if you go into your smartphone and you go in settings and notifications, you'll scroll down to the bottom and you'll see these wireless emergency alerts. One of those is an Amber Alert, which you might already have enabled. But there's also emergency alerts for weather as well. So if you ever get on an iPhone, it's like a big yellow screen that's like, there's flash flooding in the area until 1 p.m. Then you probably have a WEA enabled on your phone. If not, consider doing that. Can definitely be really critical, especially if you're in an area where you might not be aware that a tornado or some unexpected event is happening. I have all sorts of alarms go off on mine, so they're terrifying. But they also remind me to check them just in case something might be happening close to me or my family. So in addition to wireless emergency alerts, you may also want to consider purchasing a NOAA weather radio. NOAA is the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration. This is just an all-weather radio that provides not the most engaging broadcasting, but really helpful information in the event of an emergency or a disaster. Lets you know what's going on, what sort of roads are closed, what sort of shelters might be open. And a NOAA radio costs like $15 or so on Amazon. So I have one in the closet. It's battery powered. Most of the time, my kids just play with it because they find it fun to change to the dial. But a good thing to keep on hand in case your cell phones go down or in case communications go down and you want to get real-time information on what's going on. There's also a host of apps out there that you can download that provides you their versions of wireless emergency alerts. You can download the National Weather Service app. FEMA has an app. The American Red Cross have an app. So if that's of interest to you, definitely feel free to download those and enable the notifications. So again, it will send you information based on your location if you have that enabled. So once you know where your information is coming from, you also want to think about your sheltering plan. And we're going to talk about a few different things. The first of which is a mass care shelter. So a mass care shelter is a place where folks go to be safe from a storm. Typically, this can happen either before an event, if it's something with warning like a hurricane, or it could happen after an event. So let's say a tornado touches down and a huge neighborhood is affected, and they might evacuate to a mass care shelter. I worked in these shelters for years. I worked primarily with kids in these shelters to make sure they had appropriate safeguards, because shelters can be a pretty intimidating place for a kid and for families. But they are typically run like a machine. Folks really know what they're doing. They know how to get bedding available. They know how to make sure that instructions are available, that folks are able to um, navigate all of the different schedules and things going on. They can feel a bit chaotic in full transparency. I think folks are generally pretty calm in a mass care shelter for a day or two, and then it starts getting more and more stressful as time goes on. But critical resource, really important for folks, and sometimes the only place you really have an option to go. I'm going to teach you an interesting tip right now. If you text the word shelter, SHELTER, and your zip code to the number 43362, again, that's shelter and your zip code to 43362, it will give you a list of any shelters within a 100-mile radius of where you are. If it says there are not any shelters, then that's probably a good thing. It might mean that there's no active emergencies in your area. But just an interesting tip to keep in your back pocket should you need to locate a mass care shelter for yourself or for someone else in a pinch. That's kind of a cool system that's available. So that's mass care shelters. The other option is shelter in place. This can happen for a variety of reasons. One, you might not have enough warning to leave, right? Maybe it's an earthquake, maybe it's a tornado, maybe it's something you don't have much choice over, or some folks just choose to shelter in place and kind of ride out whatever disaster's coming. If you find yourself in that scenario, make sure you go to an interior room. You probably remember this from drills as a kid, dependent on where you grew up. But go into a room with as few windows as possible. If you have the ability, you can seal the windows and doors and air vents with thick plastic sheeting and duct tape. Some folks cut those things in advance and keep them in a closet and then grab them as needed. You can also just keep duct tape and plastic sheeting around, and you can do it on the fly. But you want to just make sure you are, if at all possible, in the most interior place in your home without windows. A lot of folks, if it's a tornado, they might also consider getting in the bathtub and covering themselves with blankets or other articles so that if there's flying glass or debris, they're not injured. But that is something to consider for sheltering in place. I always want to note, think of the places you as an individual spend the most time in your life. So, for example, mine is easy because I work from home and I live at home. So, my house is going to be the place where I need to plan which interior room to go into. I would go into the basement and go into the bathroom within the basement. But if you are at home and you're in a physical office or maybe a school, think about those places. Where would you go in the event of an emergency, and how would you remain safe? So I always think for shelter in place, just plan for the places you spend the most amount of your time. Um, we're talking about sheltering. We also want to talk about evacuation. So this is basically how you're planning to leave and where you will go. So evacuation is tricky in that it's really good to have multiple evacuation routes. Where I live here in Chapel Hill, there's two roads that would go to interstate, which could get me anywhere. But those are also the two roads that are most likely to get congested or have an accident or for you to get stuck in. But there is a system of more rural roads that will also get me out of town if needed. So I always suggest getting multiple evacuation routes. Um, and then again, going back to our WEAs, check about the local road conditions before you evacuate, because that might tell you there's an accident on the road you're planning to take. It's time to pivot to plan B. Um, so if you're going to evacuate, always good to have several locations, kind of dependent on the path of the storm. And if you're planning to go to some friend's house, if they're your evacuation plan, I always think it's good to tell them that, so that you don't just show up at their doorstep, but let them know that they are your evacuation backup. And if needed, if possible, you would let them know you were on the way. Otherwise, you can always choose a motel or a hotel. Um, but you want to have evacuation routes that are likely outside of the town you're in, just in case the town you're in is completely decimated. And I suggest also choosing one much further out, maybe a few 100 miles away, in case your whole state or whole area is affected by a disaster. So just think through, it doesn't take long, just think through a few evacuation places. Um, Want to note with mass care shelters and really any type of housing, uh, if you're planning to stay at a hotel, if you've identified one, check to see if they have pet policies, if you're planning to evacuate with your pets. A lot of mass care shelters may or may not accept pets, which can be really difficult for folks. A lot of families will not stay there and will choose to remain in their car or try to find another place of safety. So if pets are dear to you and important members of your household, check with what the policies are on the places that you're planning to evacuate and plan accordingly. A lot of hotels will allow pets, but at a very steep cost. So just want a note of caution there. Um, Last thing, or next to last thing I'll mention about personal planning is that it's really critical that you have a family or household communication plan. This to me is probably the most important part of preparedness planning, which is making sure that everybody who's part of your household, whatever that looks like to you, is aware of what the plan is if a disaster happens. So, for example, I have two younger children. I want them to be aware of what my wife and my name is, our phone number, and our address. And so one of my children is old enough to be able to remember those things, the other is not, in which case you can always just put a luggage tag on their backpack or whatever item they bring to their school. So that if somebody finds them, they'll be able to know who to contact, as well as make sure to add a note if they're on any critical medications and that need to be administered. So if there's somebody taking care of your child in the absence of you being able to get to them immediately, they just need to be aware of what to do. Household communication plan is they're available on ready.gov. They can be kind of like a workbook. You just fill them out. But one thing that's interesting to me is that we have one for my current home, but every year my wife and I forget what our evacuation points were. We always think it's different cities. So it helps to revisit because that could be a problem if we show up in entirely different areas with different kids, right? And are trying to connect with one another. So it's not meant to be a static document. It's meant to be a conversational piece. But it's really helpful to have those conversations with your kids and with your family, and in a way that's not scary. It's not meant to terrify anyone. It's just meant to help inform them. So you want to have those conversations in as non-dramatic fashion as possible, and just really explain the intent of those. One random tip I'm going to give that's really not part of the presentation, but if cell phone towers go down, sometimes it's helpful to text others. Text messages may still go through, even if phone calls will not. So keep that in mind if you're trying to contact somebody and you're not getting a hold of them. They might be able to get a text, even if the phone lines are tied up. So just a random tip there, but can avoid a lot of stress if something's going on. The last thing that I'm going to mention with personal preparedness is that it's important to have a kit. And so some call it an emergency kit, some call it a go bag. Really, the whole point of it is to have stuff in one place, important things in one place, so that you can get them quickly if needed. When you look at this picture on the screen, you might think, I have all these things, but they're scattered throughout the house. Some of them are in a closet. You don't know if your flashlight has batteries. Um, Good time to just get as much of this together as possible. We are in the throes here in North Carolina of hurricane season. Every year I have to take a look at my go bag because some of the things expire, such as food, and water only lasts for so long as well. So some general guidance. Water, you want 1 gallon per person per day in your household. Um, and also consider how much water you might need for pets. So you actually might need a significant amount of water on hand. Cash is always critical, especially if ATMs go down or there's a run on ATMs and they run out of money. I always recommend if there's a disaster coming and you know about it, it's good to go ahead and get a full tank of gas in advance, just in case you get in one of those horrific gas lines or the gas stations start running out of gas and you need to get out of town. First aid kit, of course. Medicines are really critical, as well as chargers. And it used to have to explain what an N95 mask was, but since the pandemic, I think everyone knows what an N95 mask is. Really good in case the air quality is down or if there's some sort of unexpected chemical that's been released into the air. Want to make sure you have enough of those for your family. And then the other stuff, medications, passports, etc., is great things to have. You don't have to have absolutely everything on the list, but it is good to have some of the critical items. Um, Also, you may want to consider having a different go bag for the adults in the house and the children. Maybe you create one for your children that has some games or activities, because if you're stuck with kids in a disaster, that can be worse than the disaster itself. So maybe consider having some games for them. Also, you might want to have a go bag for your pets. So think about having some dog food, some water, maybe some toys on hand for them as well. So that's all I say on that. Spend a few minutes and just throw as many of these items as you can. And Last one I do see here is a whistle, which is great in case you get trapped and you're trying to get folks to be able to find you. So that was a lot on personal preparedness. As I mentioned earlier, if you have any questions, pop them into the chat box. Again, a topic I'm obviously passionate about and am concerned, candidly, because I think preparedness is something that's often an afterthought. And after an emergency, you go, gosh, I wish I had had a go bag, or I wish I'd had some of these things. And, so want to talk about this on the front end of an emergency, hopefully. Okay, so we've talked about personal preparedness. Let's talk a little bit about professional preparedness. So, professional preparedness, by professional, that's a little bit of an innocuous term. I meant preparedness for your artistic practice. This studio protector guide that you see on the screen. This was developed in 2018. It's kind of a cool resource in that you can put this on the wall of your studio and get a good snapshot of different elements of preparedness you might want to consider for your practice. So you see it's built into different kind of huge buckets or areas. We're going to talk about insurance at a relatively detailed level today, but also consider some questions you might want to ask yourself about the building itself. Do you have a lease on file? What sort of responsibilities are shared? Do you have an HVAC? How are you dealing with storage and disposal? This guide is kind of helpful just to throw up there and mentally walk through some of the items you have or don't have. We also have this in another format, which is checklist. So it's the same buckets, but it's actually checklist, and you go through and you check which of these elements you've done versus the ones that you haven't. So therefore, you can kind of hone in your preparedness plan a little bit more. So these are all free. Everything I mentioned is free on our website, and it's in English and Spanish, which is kind of cool. Um, so yeah, just want to do a plug about this poster that you can print out. But one of the first steps you want to think about when you're doing preparedness for your practice is what assets are the most critical things to your artistic practice. And I never understand necessarily what the word assets means. When somebody says that, I don't have anything that comes to mind. So I'm going to kind of break down assets into different buckets and some categories that you want to consider when you're thinking through your assets. So the first of which is the structure, and that's the space, basically the physical space that supports your artistic practice. So where is your practice conducted? Do you have a studio? Do you work in a classroom? Do you have a gallery? Any sort of physical space where your practice is, that's going to be kind of your first asset. So think about the structures that are important. Next thing you want to think about are things. And things are artwork that you produce. It could be tools or equipment. It could be any sort of technology. So if you're using laptops, or other things to promote or sell your artwork, those are things that are an asset for your practice. And I think after emergency, folks tend to generally think of the things they've lost first. So I've lost my kiln. I have lost uh, 500 vases. I have lost my laptop. So those are all things that are critical assets for your practice. The third one I would never think of unless somebody had told me, but it's people in relationships. So those are folks who are really essential to your practice. That could be studio assistants, customers or clients, students, galleries that you work with, even mentors. So do you have any mentors who are really critical to your practice? That is an asset that helps you create your artwork. And lastly, I'll mention events. So where do you do your art? Do you go to classes, performances, shows? Are there any festivals or any other events that are part of your artistic practice? I think folks really feel the effect of events going away after an emergency, when everything's canceled or when tourism drops. They realize how critical events really are to their artistic practice, especially if it's the bulk of their sales or the bulk of the work that they create where they show it. So events are the last asset. So just to quickly recap: structures, things, people and relationships, events. So those are kind of big buckets of assets to start thinking about. The next part, which is very critical, is thinking about the risk, and specifically what the risk could be that would affect your asset. Um, so risk could mean anything to anyone. So I'm going to give you a couple prompts to help you get started. The first risk, which I tend to talk too much about, which is disasters. There's going to be climate-related disasters or man-made. Um, but think about your geographic region or the area where you primarily show your work. What are the disasters that are most likely to happen? North Carolina's where I am is pretty easy. It's going to be hurricanes and flooding are going to be the issues, but we occasionally get tornadoes and even earthquakes and things like that. But it's really hurricanes and flooding that happen most often. Second category you want to think about is physical theft or damage to your studio equipment. What sort of risk does that pose to you, and how would that affect your art? Um, Give an example of a risk I wouldn't have necessarily thought about. We administer an emergency relief grant program, and we have seen a number of cases of things like arson. And it has happened in buildings that are full of artist studios. So somebody sets a fire, and 10 artists lose their whole studio space and all of their work. That would not necessarily have been a risk I would have put on the list or thought about. Um, but you never know. Like things like that could happen. And obviously the effects are devastating because you pretty much lose everything. Um, so think about that type of stuff. What sort of damage could happen to your studio? Third bucket is illness or injury. This is going to happen to all of us at various times. And it may happen to you, it may happen to somebody close to you, and you have to put your practice on hold and take care of them. So, if that happens, what sort of effect will that have on your artistic practice? So, if you're somebody who uses your hands a lot and you injure a part of your body, what's that going to do to your practice, or how are you going to be able to continue practice or pause your practice? Economic downturns or market changes. I think this is a concern of all of ours. Pandemic was obviously an extreme example of that, where everything closed and no one could really access the markets that they typically use to sell their work. I know a lot of folks ended up pivoting more to e-commerce during that time. But as we're looking at the job reports and the economic future, I think we're all concerned about economic downturns and the cost of materials going up. So what sort of effect would that have on your current practice? Next category is technological failures or data loss. What if there's ransomware? What if somebody gets into your system and steals everything? How are you going to How would you deal with that? What sort of effect would that have on your assets? And then lastly, again, this will happen to all of us. Those are personal emergencies, family crisis, death in your family. Um, think about, what sort of effect that would have on your assets. So there are what are called risk assessment calculators out there, and those are calculators that help you basically come up with a score of how much a specific risk would have on a particular asset. And so, for example, if I had a studio in my basement, what are the odds of my home flooding? At this time, I can confidently say probably a 10 out of 10. And what effect would that have on my studio? Pretty significant because anything that was flooded would be destroyed, and that space would likely not be habitable for a while. So we could say that that's maybe a 9 out of 10. So you put a 10 out of 10 on risk, 9 out of 10 on effect or impact. That'll give you a score that's 95% likely to happen or affect your practice. And through those scores, you can kind of start to prioritize. All right, flood is something I should definitely plan for. Alien invasion, 10% score. Maybe that's kind of further down the list. So you can't plan for all emergencies at once, but you can kind of bundle some of them together. You can take some preparedness actions that will help you in any sort of event. And one of those is, which we're going to talk about, is documenting and archiving your work. We know if you do that, you'll be able to rebound much faster. So we're going to do a little bit of business continuity planning. But consider using a risk calculator. You don't have to. You can also just kind of think in your head, this is what I know is most likely, and prioritize those risks. But it helps you get started and helps you know what sort of things you would like to kind of jump into. So first thing we're going to talk about is documentation. And by this, I mean the what and the how. What does the what and the how mean? It means what do you need to document that's critical to your practice, and how are you going to do it? So this list that's on the screen is not comprehensive, but these are some things that kind of immediately come to mind when you think about your practice. Think about your contracts and invoices, your insurance policies, your taxes, your gallery agreements, your wills, sales, portfolio, contact list, even your resume, and an inventory of artwork or studio contents. I will say, going through the insurance process recently from the flood that I just experienced, they ask for everything you've ever gotten in terms of documentation. So, okay, what was lost? Do you have pictures of it? Do you have receipts? Those things become really critical when you're trying to get back and potentially get some support. So documentation, documentation, documentation is nothing you really want to mess around with, because after a disaster happens, it becomes really hard to document it because you might not have this stuff readily available. One of the easiest ways you can start this process even today is just by using your smartphone. You can walk around your studio and take a video of everything that's in there. And you can narrate that video. Like, you talk about it. We're looking at a kiln model, blah, 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 that I purchased at this date. It is so many years old. Obviously, the more details you can provide around the things or the inventory you're looking at, the better you're going to fare when you have to file insurance paperwork or you have to file for disaster recovery support. Um, so you could do that today. You could just walk around with your smartphone, video everything you can. Um, and then make sure you save that video somewhere that's hopefully in the cloud. That could be Google Drive, that could be Dropbox, somewhere that's not physically tied to your phone, because if you lose your phone and it's not backed up, you've lost the video, right? So think about how and where you're going to store that information. Um, when you document your assets, it is ideal to have as much detail as possible. Obviously, this is kind of difficult unless you're using something like a spreadsheet. SurfPlus has free inventory spreadsheets for you to check out. And that helps you think through some of the categories you want to capture with each item, such as its title, its dimensions, the medium price, sales record, the date, make, model, description, the approximate year you purchased it, even the condition of the item. And again, that information is so critical when you're making insurance claims, when you're making disaster support claims. They want to know it all, right? And so the folks who tend to get support from those programs, if at all, are the ones who kind of have their ducks in a row and have everything written down. Um, so narrating a video is great. Having a video and a spreadsheet is even better, right? That's kind of the next level. As I mentioned, we have a few spreadsheets available. One of them's for art inventory, so you can track the details of your artwork and all the categories that I just mentioned. We also have one for equipment, which we know an artist without their tools is going to have a pretty hard time creating. And then we have one for sales. So you can track all your sales, the date, customer name, artwork sold, even the sale price, um, and consignment. So if you sell your work through any galleries or venues, you can use that spreadsheet to track your consignment agreements and other important information. I talk a lot about business continuity. There's a lot of stats out there, so don't quote me directly, but it's something like 70 something percent, maybe 79% of small businesses, which include a lot of artists, do not exist 2 years after a major disaster. And a large reason is because there's significant losses and potentially they got very little to no support for recovery, or they just had a really difficult time getting back on their feet. So I say that not to terrify you, but more for the reality that every little bit helps after an emergency. and things like documentation is your best tool to get you back up and operational as quickly as possible, which may be the difference between your practice surviving an event or having to close up shop for a while. So, if you're looking for more comprehensive documentation software, there's a lot of options on the market. I always say know thyself when it comes to documentation. If you're somebody who loses their keys all the time, who's kind of a hot mess, maybe you don't need a really comprehensive inventory documentation. Like a video and a spreadsheet is pretty cool. But if you're somebody who has colored sticky notes, who loves this type of stuff, who's really going to invest the time and energy into it, then consider that because they can be more robust and they can have pretty cool features. The cost of those varies widely. Some are like $50 for something like Artwork Archive, and some of the larger programs are more than $1,000 a year. So you don't want to invest $1,000 a year into a software unless you're really going to use it. Um, Most software tools focus on the artwork itself and the related contents. There is a program out there called GYST, GIST, which is an exception because it also includes artist supplies. So consider researching, trying out different software tools, but really you want to find one that suits your needs and your budget. Just doing a quick time check. I think we're doing pretty good. Um, Business insurance. Oof, this is a critical one. Note of caution and something I've said for years, but it's still a shock sometimes, is that most folks' homeowners policy will not cover the losses associated with your practice. So a lot of folks have their studio in their home. They think their homeowners policy is going to cover all the items that were lost. Turns out they see that as a separate entity altogether. Therefore, you're supposed to have business insurance. So if you have a homeowner's policy and you're under the impression that it covers your artistic practice, please check out that policy. Make sure you read it, ask questions if you need to. It could, uh, but more often than not, it doesn't. And also, with flooding, you know, we have a homeowner's policy. It did not cover floods from a hurricane. I knew to expect that, which is why they require you to have a separate flood insurance policy. Probably heard a lot about those. You could check out FEMA's website. They have a national flood insurance program. There's not a lot of folks specific to the region I'm in that will offer it, but it is worth looking into, especially considering the losses that flooding can cause. So just want to note that there's a lot of nuance in insurance, and often they are different policies you have to cover for different things. So probably nothing you don't know, but something that's really been reiterated to me, especially in the last recent months. Insurance is obviously one of the best assets you can invest in. It can be your first line of protection. As you were writing down your assets earlier, there's different types of uh, business insurance. The first of which we were talking about around structures, could be your building insurance. So that covers the physical structure of your studio. Um, so again, if your studio is located in the same property as your home, your homeowner's insurance may not cover it. So it's good to have a separate property building insurance, business insurance. Um, Next, business personal property. That covers the things that we were talking about. In other words, the contents of your studio. So that could be tools or equipment, raw materials, works in progress, finished products. A business personal property insurance can cover those things. A category that I wasn't aware of, but is really important is inland marine insurance. This protects your work and property while it's in transit or away from your studio. So if you do a lot of teaching, if you do a lot of arts festivals, if you're traveling a lot with your artwork and something happens while you're on the road, maybe it all gets stolen, maybe it all gets smashed. inland marine insurance can be a way to protect it when it's away from your studio. Personal property of others is kind of interesting. If you're somebody who does a lot of repair or conservation work, this can help cover that work if it's damaged or destroyed while it's in your possession. It will not cover if you destroy it yourself. So if you accidentally put a hammer through a painting, it's not going to cover that. But if you have a painting in your possession and a flood occurs, um, or a fire or another event, then it might support that. So if you're somebody who does a lot of repair or conservation work, could be worth looking into. Um, it's important. I am not an insurance expert, don't claim to be, won't be able to answer hyper-specific questions around insurance, but it is important that you talk to different insurance agents who specialize in art-related coverage, and make sure that they understand what your needs are. I think one of the worst things is getting upsold into a package that's not going to help you in the long run. So you may want to ask your friends who are artists what sort of business insurance they have and if they like the organization or the company that they're working with, and make sure that it feels like it's the right fit for you. I always say don't be shy asking questions in insurance. If stuff's going over your head in that conversation, then that's not a good sign, right? That's generally not great. You shouldn't walk away from an insurance conversation with more questions than answers. So make sure that the insurance is covering the things that you really need it to cover and at a price that you feel comfortable with. Um, I'll briefly talk about liability. This is what I think most folks think about with insurance, which is, worst case, somebody's on your property, they trip and fall off your deck for whatever strange reason, and they get injured and they sue you. General liability protects you if somebody's injured while they're on your property and or your property causes damage to others. So if you have an artwork and it falls on somebody, general liability may be able to support you with that. Liability insurance stays with you while you're at a location other than your studio. So that's something really critical to think about. Um, there's different types of liability, one of which is product and operations liability. So that covers you in the event that someone's injured by a product or while you're performing your work somewhere. So if you're doing some sort of stage performance or you have a giant installation and something goes awry, product and operations liability can cover you if somebody's injured with that. Errors and omissions is kind of an interesting one. If you're somebody who does a lot of public speaking or teaching and you're giving advice to folks, you may want to consider having this. So if somebody's injured because of information you might have omitted, or then you can be sued for that. And errors and omissions is an insurance policy that protects you in the case that somebody sues because they said they were following your advice. So something I wouldn't have necessarily thought about. Umbrella policy, this is that really nice security blanket. This kicks in when all of your other liability has been exhausted. And it's a way to ensure that you're really protected from worst case scenarios. What I like about it is it's much more affordable than other insurances, in part because it only kicks in after the other liability is exhausted. They typically sell this in increments of $1 million, so you could have $1 million of umbrella, 2 million, 3 million, and again, it's very affordable. So if you're a person who really is risk aversive and you want to provide the ultimate protection for yourself, then definitely check out umbrella policies. I think they are a great idea for folks, especially small businesses. I mentioned other information out there. The Spirit Business Insurance Guidebook I will plug is probably our best resource available. It's the one that artists seem to enjoy the most. And just because it's super practical. And in 10 or 15 minutes, you can get a snapshot of all the different varieties of business insurance. Some additional policies that you might consider purchasing in addition to what we've discussed. You can have a flood insurance policy, earthquake insurance policy, extended business income, extra expenses. So if you have to relocate your studio for any reason, workers' compensation, all sorts of things, commercial auto coverage, obviously. All of these policies are kind of called out in this guidebook. They're definitely worth looking into. But really, before you decide on an insurance plan, I think it's great to have what's called a commentary. And that's kind of a clear and detailed description of your business operations. So that can include your background, your experience, size and scope of your operations. Having that information on the outset helps insurance agents find the right policy for you. There are also what's called commercial lines of business insurance, which they kind of like cobble together different packages that mostly meet the needs of folks similar to you. And those may be worth looking into because they can be a little bit more cost effective. Instead of just kind of buying all these separate policies, you might be able to purchase a package that fits you a little bit better. So I mentioned shop around. Don't don't go with any policy that you think might not be the right fit for you. Um, Ask a ton of questions, but really the goal is hopefully for you not to be completely uninsured. Because if you're uninsured and something catastrophic happens, it can be a really steep climb back up. Um, I think that's all I want to mention on insurance. There's one more thing I do want to mention. If you want to check the financial stability of an insurance underwriter before you sign up for a policy, there is a resource called AM Best, and that provides free basic rating reports on insurance companies. So again, that's AM, like morning time, Best. You can type in the insurer you're working with and see what their financial stability is, just so making sure you don't get into a bad situation. Um, so I think that's enough on insurance. We are still doing pretty good on time, so I'm gonna kind of quickly-ish breeze through some resources. But every so often, I will mention we do a business insurance webinar. Well, I'll bring in somebody who actually knows what they're talking about with business insurance, and you can ask questions to them. And that's the time for you to get into like nitty-gritty questions. Like, I have 3 employees, and this could happen, and this could happen. What should I look into? I think those are really great resources. So again, if you go to our webpage, sign up for our newsletter, you can find out about the next one that we'll host. But I find those really helpful conversations. Okay, so we have a lot of these resources. I'm super proud of them. I love them. We just updated all of these in October. Again, they're in Spanish and English, but I think in total we have like 13 or so guides. Around all different topics. There's also one comprehensive guide that has all 13 of these involved. So you can also welcome to click on that and just navigate. But we have some information on how you can protect your records. So if you found that documentation portion interesting, maybe you want to learn more details about how to protect your assets by inventorying, you can check out how to protect your records. We also have a legacy guide. So for folks who are thinking about estate planning, this is kind of a cool resource that I think folks are becoming more and more interested in. Definitely feel free to check that out. We just kind of gathered some general advice from folks when they're considering will and estate planning, which is really critical for artists because they have such unique legacies, and we want to make sure those are preserved and carry on to the best of their wishes. Um, but yeah, feel free to check this out. I mentioned that the little poster at the beginning had a checklist. That's that Surf Plus Studio Guide, Protect Yourself. So that's the one that actually has like check boxes you can go through. But this is our online studio protector guide. We also have some information around wellness, which is a topic that artists have recently told us is one of their most important. Um, I also want to plug a couple of partner resources. So I mentioned ready.gov. We also have this Save Your Family Treasures sheet. This is from HINTEF, the Heritage Emergency National Task Force. And this helps folks when they've had an emergency salvage as much as they can. Um, so kind of a cool thing for you to pass on. If you're in an organization, you want to share this with artists who've just gone through something, a way they can potentially preserve some of their artwork. Also, we have partnered with Nest and the Environmental Defense Fund and Etsy. Some of our resources from our Studio Protector are in these guides as well. They have responding to climate disasters and building climate resilience. Really cool guidebooks for makers and entrepreneurs. Those are also on our website, so I want to make a plug for those. Um, Lastly, I want to mention uh, there is a website called Crisis Cleanup, and this is a website immediately following an emergency where you can go and basically you put in a work order. You'll speak to a representative. They'll say, "What happened? Where are you?" And then what they can do is they can connect you with local volunteer groups who can help you clean up or recover from an emergency. This is a resource I've talked about for years. I know the person who started it, and I didn't think about it till day 5 after we had our flood. And I was like, what was that? Oh, crisis cleanup. And as soon as I called them, they were fantastic. They sent out a team of volunteers from a Southern Baptist church who helped us pull out some of the things in the downstairs that were starting to mold, which, as you know, remediation can be very expensive. So a great way to save some money, but also get some immediate support. So I want to make a very important plug for crisis cleanup. That can be one of the first resources that you send to folks. Also want to mention the Disaster Distress Helpline. This is a program administered through SAMHSA, but it is a helpline that folks can call right after an emergency, and they're just there to support you. An emergency can often be a grieving process. You have folks go through different cycles of shock, and then kind of acceptance, and then frustration, and things like that. And Disaster Stress Helpline is a great resource for folks to go and really just get a somebody to listen to them and be able to talk about some of the challenges that they're going through. So something I also want to pass on in addition to crisis cleanup, one of those really important resources as we look to help folks through the mental challenges of a disaster as well. Okay, I think we've done pretty good. We got about 20 minutes left. I'm going to quickly share my information. You can also reach us at programs@craftemergency.org if you have a question around webinars or trainings, or grants or anything. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and see if there's any questions.
Thank you, Cameron. And yes, I see 2 questions in the Q&A. And I encourage others, if there's something you think about, go ahead and pop them in. Okay, so the first question, for a Get Ready grant, would you have to own the property that you're using the funds towards? For example, converting a space into a home studio that's technically not your house.
No, you don't have to own it. We also realize that artists work in like 1,000 different types of studio type situations. So no, as long as the project itself is positioned as a way to prevent future emergencies, then it should be eligible.
Okay, next question. How can we protect our personal property if we are in an area or have had previous claims and can't get insurance? Or if a storm category has changed and they won't insure due to a different cause?
Totally fair question, right? And as we see states starting to uninsure all sorts of different types of emergencies, wildfires, hurricanes, floods, this is increasingly difficult is getting insurers to insure you. And as I mentioned, our own experience, I'll be transparent. We had one company that was going to offer us a flood insurance policy, so we didn't have choices. There wasn't a way um, to shop around or to compare quotes. And I'm not even optimistic that company will continue, as North Carolina has had pretty devastating hurricanes this past year with Western North Carolina, Central North Carolina. So I don't have a wonderful answer other than keep trying. Policies change quickly. Insurances fold. Sometimes they come back. But it is incredibly frustrating, and I can definitely sympathize with that. Recently, I actually gave this webinar to somebody who was in Guam, and they're like, "Well, who's going to give me business insurance in Guam?" And I did a lot of research and could not find any national entity that was willing to do business insurance. I found one potential local one. So sometimes a hyper-local insurance carrier will support their own community, but a lot of the national entities will not. So it might also be worth checking into your local insurers to see if they're offering anything.
All right, last question. Do you recommend liability insurance for virtual events?
I would be curious to hear more about that. So, I would say if you're doing virtual events, I'm not entirely sure what the risk would be to someone sustaining an injury, but I mentioned errors and omissions. So, if you're doing a virtual event and you are giving a talk or you're giving advice, and someone then goes and gets injured from that, that could be a business insurance policy that's applicable to you. So, it kind of depends on the nature of the event. I can't necessarily think of a scenario where liability would be relevant. But that, then again, as I always caution, I'm not an insurance expert. So if you still have that question and want to hop on a webinar we're hosting, please bring that because that's kind of an interesting scenario.
Okay, so they followed up with liability insurance for virtual artistic teaching.
Got it. Yeah. So that is interesting, right? Because the students, again, errors and omissions is probably the most likely. But yeah, how about if I could grab their name, Lisa? I would love to follow up with somebody we work with on business insurance and just ask them because I'm actually kind of curious.
Okay, I will be sure to pass that on because they
Thank
did
you.
talk about teaching sewing machine and fabric cutting techniques. So yes,
Okay, so
I
folks who
will,
get injured. Yeah, got it.
yes, I will pass that on. And
Interesting.
then we have a question, let's see, or comment rather. I teach with a torch, so I expect that virtual event issue could be someone burning themselves.
Yeah. Yeah, that totally makes sense. In that case, possibly, right? I really can't answer for certain without speaking to an insurance agent, but it does sound like there's an inherent risk to the class, even if you're not in the same physical space. But that virtual element is a little bit challenging, right? So they're not in your area getting injured, but they're maybe in their home or their studio. So yeah, I would really love to ask somebody. And since other folks are asking that, Lisa, how about I follow up with you and we could share that?
Sounds good. Sounds good.
Yeah,
Okay.
disclaimer. That's true, Hillary. Yeah.
Yep. Good point, Hillary.
Hmm.
Are there any circumstances where we need to have items appraised for valuation before a disaster?
Um, yeah, I mean, I could say it can't hurt, especially if you have very valuable artwork, right? Because maybe you know that an item is worth a certain amount, but insurer is not going to see it that way. They're going to say that that is a painting that's worth $200. So they might have a very different um, uh, mode from which to judge an item and its worth. But if you had an official appraisal and could counter that with that paperwork, that might change the way that it was funded. So if you have the means, if you have the energy to do that, I would not say it would hurt. Again, the more documentation, the better. Because one thing I realized is everything we put that was damaged from the flood, they have somebody come through and do a full assessment and they have a checklist. And they go, "Oh, was this fridge damaged?" And they shake the fridge. Well, how damaged? They really lock in on what the actual value of the item was lost and the actual damage it sustained. So if you're ever filling out that paperwork, always be as honest as possible. And if you think something's damaged, you can put it on there and then talk to the person doing the assessment to kind of explain what's going on. So, realize that's a bit of a side tangent, but I guess my point is you have to be, they're very, very literal in how much replacement costs for each item are and what damage really looks like.
Excuse me. All right, this is a follow-up to a previous question.
Mhm.
But if it's the artist's artwork, they can only claim supplies, correct? So only appraisals for others' work would be relevant, I guess.
So if it's an artist artwork, they could only claim supplies. They mean like finished products versus like the canvas and the paint and like
For
the
like a
supplies.
tax donation, Cameron, they can only take the cost of what was used to make it. They can't assume like what they think they would sell it for, is my understanding.
Interesting. You know, I, that's an interesting question. So, for example, to break it down, would a ceramic vase be worth what the vase would sell for, or would it be worth what the materials that went into the vase were for? My assumption, though it could be wrong, is that it would be what the vase would sell for, and if there's sales records associated with it, that could back up that claim, saying I lost 50 vases. That would have been $5,000 of inventory for me. Is that the question? I think so.
Says, yes, artists cannot claim full value for tax purposes. I'm not sure how insurance
Tax
companies would
versus.
qualify the value of marketable inventory.
Yeah, and it's a good question, right? And I think they would look towards whatever documentation you have for what that item is worth. So if you have a similar product that you have sold, you might be able to use that receipt from the sale to justify the cost of that item that you lost. Otherwise, to your point, they're probably going to give you the lowest value they can on that item. So yeah, somebody asked about appraiser. That's an interesting idea, and I think that um, um, could help with that. So somebody said my insurance company covers your pressure written appraisal of value of my complete grass. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. Yep.
That looks to be all of the questions, Cameron.
Those are great questions.
So those were excellent questions. I look forward to your follow-up and I will make sure that everyone gets it. I'd just like to ask everyone to please, I placed the link in the chat and I will also share my screen so that you can get the QR code as well. And again, it's a brief webinar for today's session. And we just ask that you fill that out for us. Again, there's also a link in the chat if you can't get to the QR code. And with that, we thank you all for coming and wish you all a great day.
Thank you all for having me.
Bye. Thank you.
Take care. Have a good day.
You too.